Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about movies, music, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Jerrod Niemann, titled High Noon. Okay, so do you guys remember back when I reviewed the Eli Young Band that I said it was just a period of time where I wasn't listening to a lot of country music outside of the charts? Well, even with that scant knowledge, I had no idea who Jerrod Niemann was before starting to research this album. And he had a #1 country single that actually briefly landed on the pop charts. I should know who this guy was. But that was also the first warning sign I got when starting to go through Niemann's discography and those hit singles that got popular. Signed to C. Gale Arista Nashville, a label co-owned by Brad Paisley, Jerrod Niemann released his major label debut in 2010. And you know what? It's not hard to see some of Brad Paisley's welcome influences on that album. It was silly, hopelessly corny country music. But then again, it wasn't offensive. But on the other hand, I'd have a hard time calling it all that interesting or all that distinctive either. What would separate this guy out of the pack? Outside of some comedy bits and maybe the fact that Jerrod Niemann has an agreeable voice, I'd have a hard time picking him out of the lineup of other good time country party singers. And it looked like the general public agreed, as his second album did have greater musical flavor and instrumental diversity, but not a lot else, especially in the breezy songwriting, to really give Niemann a lot of distinctive staying power on his own. He reminded me a lot of Jake Owen, except Jake Owen always seemed to have a lot more charisma, or maybe he got lucky and had better songwriters, I'm not sure. And thus, I can't exactly say that I was enthused to listen to Jerrod Niemann's third album, High Noon, especially off of his lead single, Drink to That All Night, which featured the twin cardinal sins of bro country in bad, low-key rapping and auto-tune, and none of the instrumental diversity or the sense of humor that at least made Jerrod Niemann somewhat remotely distinctive in the country scene. And thus, I gotta be honest, I was not looking forward to covering this album, but I figured I owed him at least one chance to really come out and surprise me here. So I gave the album a listen. How'd it go? Ugh. Frankly, I shouldn't even be reviewing albums like this at this point, because maybe with the grace of God, maybe if I stopped drawing attention to albums like this, they'd start going away. But if anything, this record, it's a bigger disappointment than even I was expecting, and I can't imagine how hardcore Jerrod Niemann fans are taking this, because not only does this album thoroughly wedged Jerrod Niemann to just another bro country act, they stripped away all of the elements that would have at least given him some identity within that subgenre. And while I can't say this album is as obnoxious as Thomas Rhett, or as asinine as Cole Swindle, or as just as plain awful as Justin Moore, Jerrod Niemann still managed to deliver with High Noon a thudding, boring slog of a record that I can't and won't recommend here today. So okay, let's start with Jerrod Niemann himself. And you know what? I'll hand it to him. The man gets this kind of breezy, lightweight material that he's working with. In that, his delivery tends to have the lazy drawl of being drunk and half asleep in a lawn chair. If you put him up in comparison with other lightweight country acts like, say, Jake Owen, the difference becomes even more stark. Because at least when Jake Owen, when he makes his admittedly stupid music, he at least comes across like he's trying and he's having fun. What's frustrating about Jerrod Niemann is that he does seem to have some emotional range, or at least the capacity to add more to these songs or imbibe them with deeper meaning through his delivery. But you know what? That doesn't happen here at all, mostly thanks to the bad songwriting. What's worse is that when he actually does show some energy, the minor chords, the bleaker, more sterile tone of the album, and the fact that he frequently gets eclipsed by his own backing vocalist rarely ever establish him as a real presence, especially not a comedic one, the one big distinguishing positive on his previous albums. And of course there's rapping here, both courtesy of him and his guest star Colt Ford. And yeah, it's terrible and it's inexcusable, and they'd be laughed out of any other hip-hop discussion. But you know what? With the reasonably sparse presence of the rapping on the album, it can mostly be ignored. What can't be ignored are the problems in the instrumentation and the production. And let me give this album a solitary compliment. The percussion, it can have some texture and it can get kind of interesting at points. And like every Jerrod Niemann album, there are instrumental flourishes that I do appreciate, mostly in the golf and western inspired songs, and there was a bit of harmonica on Refill. I liked that. You know, it's not that much that's all that special, but you know what? It was certainly preferable to the arsenal of incohesive electronic elements elements that are just shoveled onto this record. Drum machines crop up everywhere. The guitars frequently sound processed when they aren't shoved right to the back of the mix. And there are even record scratching noises on tracks like Buzzback Girl that made me think we jumped into a time machine and went back to 1999 to a bad cover of a Bare Naked Ladies song. And the auto-tune on this album might be some of the most blatant I've ever seen on a country record. Thankfully, mostly confined to the backup vocals, but even then, it doesn't work well because their volume against Niemann's is often way too loud. And while Niemann has defended this production by calling it experimental and saying it's the same sort of thing that Willie and Waylon did back in the 70s, the difference here is cohesion. When you have to crush your guitars and only rely on the acoustic strumming at the very front of the mix to carry the momentum, with neither carrying a good melody line or a decent hook, so that you can just cram in additional electronic elements and they don't flow well in the mix or restore any texture or have a hook of their own, you're doing it wrong. And look, do I even need to mention the songwriting at this point? I counted 8 out of the 13 songs on this album are stereotypical bro country, drinking, hanging out, and hookup songs. Nothing you haven't seen a dozen or more times in this genre and in these lyrics. You want copious day drinking, rural southern pandering, and songs that might be claiming to hunting for girls with personality and yet do nothing to describe said personality. You want those songs, Jerrod Niemann's got 'em in spades. Now, to be fair to the guy, there are a few songs that do try something reasonably new. Space is a song about Jerrod Niemann wanting to be left alone and have some quiet time, like just breathe and be by himself, and I get that. But then again, we also don't get any reasons why he wants to do this, or what makes his sudden antisocial behavior interesting or introspective, or why we should care. Then we have the song I Can't Give In Anymore, which is the song equivalent of Jerrod Niemann throwing up his hands in the air about his particular relationship and saying, you know, I don't know you anymore. If you keep changing, I'm just going to leave you. I'm tired of trying. Because that's an attractive attitude. And then there's Donkey, one of the stupidest songs you will hear this decade, where since Jerrod Niemann put his car into the ditch, clearly his fault, and since he can't pay to fix it, he's gonna ride into town to go to the club on a donkey. You know, like he's Jesus riding into Jerusalem or something. And the women will all swoon, even as the jocks, rightly, start laughing, and the ladies will all want to ride his ass so they can go off for a roll in the hay. And I'm quoting lyrics. I wish I was kidding. And if this is what Jerrod Niemann thinks is comedy now, that's telling in its own way. Honestly, the one song where I actually kind of liked it was Lucky Number 7, a song where Niemann marvels about how he somehow ended up with an 11 with his lady, and while he's just a 7, it's corny as all hell, but it's kind of endearing in a silly kind of way, and the lyrics, they aren't terrible, they've got some flavor. But Niemann, let me say this, I have a hard time calling you and this album a 7. Try more like a 4 out of 10 for this overproduced, slick, hookless clump of below-average bro country. With this record, Jerrod Niemann forfeited his personality and just become just another laid-back bro, and the only unique elements on this album are either poorly executed or obnoxious. And the worst part of it all is that for all the selling out that he did here, he made his most sterile and empty album to date with High Noon. Skip this album. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to hear it. Or if there's any other albums coming out this year, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark. I'll see you next time.